Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ed and Caitlin, for having me here. It's a great honor to get to speak to you all. When I heard I was speaking at a big data conference, I thought, what should I talk about? Should I talk about new ensemble learning methods? That could be cool. Or maybe the latest visualization tools from this year. That could be awesome. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to talk about what I know best, superheroes. So superheroes are awesome to me, right? Because these are people who are ordinary people that have extraordinary powers that they use to improve the world. And I find that story so compelling that I'd just like to share with you guys some stories about some superheroes that I really like. Well, first up, there's Spider-Man. Everyone knows Spider-Man. Starts out as mild-mannered Peter Parker until he's bitten by a radioactive spider, which gives him super strength, the ability to climb buildings, and he uses those skills to fight crime, clean up the city. Awesome. Of course, there's Batman, right? Batman didn't even have any superpowers. He just had a lot of really cool toys. Right, so long before the iPhone 5, this guy had batarangs, he had grappling hooks, and he was using those to clean up Gotham City. I think that's so great. And who could forget Tom Levine, right? An ergonomicist who used his skills to help youth in Chicago, to root out poverty in South Africa, and to clean up the environment all across the U.S. Now, I heard like a couple laughs. I see some furrowed brows. So I'm guessing you don't all know the story of Tom Levine. So let me give you the backstory. And to tell you this comic book story, I want you guys to come back in time with me. Come back to a time long, long ago, back to the dark ages of humanity, back to the year 2000, when this is what it used to be like to get directions. Oh, it was awful. You had no idea where you were going. You didn't know what traffic was going to be like. You didn't know what the weather was going to be like. It was a terrible and cruel time for mankind. But then a strange and mysterious force visited the planet that promised to unlock the secrets of the cosmos for those who could tame it. The people called it big data. They thought that big data could unlock the secrets of the world, and big data promised to turn this into this. Google Maps, a device that takes in huge amounts of data, traffic data, weather data, historical data, and crunches it all down so we can make better decisions about how to travel. And that was just the beginning. Big data started changing the way we make decisions about everything in our lives. Everything from how we decide which movies we want to watch, how we decide what products we want to buy, even how we decide who we want to be friends with. Yeah, so the world was rejoicing because people had taken control of this big data and used it to improve our lives. It was fantastic. And the people behind this were called data scientists. Now, think of them as statisticians, data analysts, hackers, whatever you call them. They're the people who are able to bend that big data to their will to make products that we all use to live better lives. But there was a problem. And the problem was there weren't enough to go around. You see, big companies like Google and Amazon, the tech companies that helped us find movies and things to buy, they had the resources for data scientists. But what about these guys? Social organizations, the third sector, foundations, nonprofits, these guys have huge amounts of data as well. They have data about their finances. They have data about their programs. Heck, there's data, as Jenny was mentioning, from open data that they could be using, all that they could be crunching down to maximize their impact. But they don't necessarily have the resources to take advantage of it. So it was a kind of a bleak moment. But there's a bright note. And the bright note is that we started to see alliances form. There were data scientists who wanted to use their skills to do something good that started teaming up with visionary nonprofits, visionary charities, who wanted to use data to do better things. These ordinary people wanted to use their extraordinary powers to team up and do more than just build apps that would help people find better restaurants. They'd build apps to help people find better lives. Now, I find that incredibly inspiring. And at DataKind, we collect stories like that. We're a nonprofit that connects data scientists who are already spending their time in hackathons and innovation challenges on weekend projects, together with nonprofits, the social sector, groups that have data that they could use to maximize their impact and want to understand how to use it. Now, we do some of this connection ourselves through things like weekend events and long-term projects, but really we're just around to help support anyone who wants to use data to do more for the world. And we've seen a huge number of projects, people doing things like this. So I wanted to just share some of those with you guys, some that I find particularly interesting. So one comes out of DC with a group called DC Action for Kids. This is an awesome group whose job is to look out for the well-being of all children in the city of Washington, D.C. It's an awesome cause, and it turns out they have awesome data for it, too. You see, they have huge amounts of data about economic indicators, they have education information, they have health information, social services data. So it sounds like they're in a great situation because they have this great cause, helping kids in D.C., and they've got great data to help them do it, from both themselves and the government. Well, it sounds great until you remember the data looks just like this. It's just data, right? And this is just rows out of hundreds of tables that these guys have to deal with. And if you're a nonprofit with very few tech resources, how do you take this and turn it into something meaningful, something that people can really make sense of? Well, a lot of times you can't. But one way you could is you could team up with people like this. This is Cece Wei and Emily Chow from the Washington Post, Max Richmond, and a slew of other people from DC who are pro bono data scientists, who teamed up with DC Action, and together they turned this into this. This is an interactive visualization that allows DC Action for Kids to zoom into each neighborhood, mouse over to immediately see demographic information, economic indicators, educational attainment. And this allows them to dig in and really look at that data that, in ways that they couldn't before as just a spreadsheet. Right? This allows them to see things they would never see in that opaque block of data. And this has become so useful to them and their constituents that they're now considering extending this to all groups that do kids counts across cities and states all in the US. I think that's pretty fantastic. Another group is the United Nations Global Pulse. And this is an incredible group under the Secretary General whose job is to take all of the data across all the UN's programs from around the world and make sense of it so they can get a pulse of the world. They did an amazing study on global well-being where they asked people from around the world to respond by cell phone how happy they were. It was a fantastic feat for mobile technology, but the end result was a lot of data to look through that they didn't have all the resources to examine. So they teamed up with people like Adam Lycano here, who works at Tumblr in his day job, Anna Smith from Bitly, and a number of other data scientists in New York. And they teamed up to help them answer a very basic question that they didn't have before, which was, where did people even respond to this survey from? How can we look at global well-being if we don't even know who's responding? So they took that big mess of data and they built this, something that showed the UN where people had responded to this survey across the globe. And it showed them immediately that there was a big burst in India at first, which then spread across the world. And this was so important to the UN that they presented it to the UN General Assembly to say, this is what we have to start doing with data. We can't pretend to be in development if we're not thinking about data this way. And lastly, very close to home, just this last weekend, 3 fantastic charities from the UK came to an event we held, just wrapped up yesterday. Oxfam, Place to Be, and Key Fund came with huge amounts of their own data and questions that they wanted to answer. Everything from how do we use resources to help troubled school children, all the way to how do we get information out to the entire globe about what Oxfam is doing. They teamed up with some familiar faces here, Duncan Ross from Teradata, Fran Bennett from Mastodon, and a number of fantastic people from AMIA, including Brian Driscoll, Emma Payne. And over 65 data scientists collaborated with these teams to help answer those questions, to help use that data. And what you're seeing here, I love this picture because what you're actually seeing here is the executive director of Key Fund sitting with a data analyst from AMIA, working through the problem together. Not just saying, hey, here's our data, can you get us the answers back? But saying, how do we actually tackle this problem together? There are a huge number of results that came out from the weekend findings, everything from how hyperactivity differs between boys and girls to where donors are more likely to give to Oxfam across the UK. And these are all things that people were able to do in a short amount of time when they were just given the resources in terms of people with data skills and the right questions and the right data available. And I often put up things like maps because they're easy to show to audiences, but the things that you won't see, that I won't be able to put up in a slide as easily, are the changes that we're seeing in organizations. We're seeing charities start to think differently about data, seeing them set aside resources to hire data scientists, actually have them on staff. We're seeing charities share their data with each other, making a more effective social sector. And we're seeing the government get involved, as Jenny was just talking about, bringing that open data into a usable form for nonprofits and data scientists. So I find this incredibly inspiring, but you may be asking, what happened to Tom Levine? What was that? How does he fit into this? Well, that's Tom up there at that table. And Tom is a coder by day, but he spends his nights and his weekends going around the world to events, whether he's hacking news in San Francisco or helping the environment in New York. This guy's been to almost every one of our DataKind events, and all but once we've held them in different cities. So I find that amazing. Think about that. This is a guy who goes around and I think really acts as a great example of this new breed of sort of data philanthropists, if you will. People using their skills for great things. Now, we've seen a lot of these projects. And after watching a lot of these projects and what people do, we've realized there are a couple of really common threads across all of them. And I want to share with you what you might call sort of data hero superpowers. The things we see the most effective groups doing, and we see this whether it's in the social sector or the for-profit. Now, some of you may do some of these, some of you may do all of them already, but we see them come up so commonly that I think it bears repeating. So the first one is start with the question, not the data. And if you're a data analyst, this is square one for you. But we still see so many companies say, hey, I've got so much data. What can I do with it? And to me, that's similar to a carpenter showing up to build your house and saying, I got a bunch of wood. What do you think I should build? It's like, yeah, that's one way to start. But a better way is, I think, to have a plan, to think about a question you want to answer, and then find the data for that. Number 2, team up with someone who knows the data's story. Again, if you're a consultant, you probably do this all the time, but we still see data scientists charging in as if they've got all the answers. A friend of mine from Code for America told me about a case where people were analyzing the San Francisco Police Department's data. And they were looking at arrests over time, and they saw this huge spike on Wednesdays when they were looking at prostitution arrests. And the scientists jumped to their feet. They exclaimed, they said, oh, San Francisco is a den of depravity, even more so on Wednesdays. Everyone's going out and getting hookers. And it only took a San Francisco police officer to look at that result and say, no, that's just when we go and do prostitution arrests. It's on a schedule. Right? So no, if you can have the best algorithms in the world. If you don't know the context, you don't really have much. Now, this is something that was said to me by Jer Thorpe at the New York Times, and I thought is so fantastic, which is that visualization is a process, not an end. So many groups think of visualization as the thing you do at the end, the result you put up, the table you build, the map you publish. But we're dealing with so much data that there's no other way we can really begin to understand it unless we have the ability to visualize it. And we're very visual creatures. Some of the best ways to make sense of all those rows and all those spreadsheets, huge petabytes of data, is to see things, to be able to visualize it. So the sooner you make visualization part of the earlier part of the process, the better. And I don't just mean looking at graphs, actually. I think there's a subtler point here. I mean, that's really great. But some of the best teams that we've seen succeed because they build visualization tools that don't just answer a problem for them, like show a pie chart every day or a timeline. They build tools that allow them to explore the data, to ask questions of the data. So I think the more that we can begin to do that, the better off we'll be. And lastly, believe it or not, it might be heresy, you don't need big data to have big insights. Almost all the projects that we see that have so much impact are done with data that could fit on a laptop. So big data may be more robust. There's a lot of amazing richness in big data, but to start off, you don't necessarily need a whole lot of data to say a lot of important things. So these are just 4 things we see repeated all the time that I think if we adopted as a sector would really make a much better and smarter data science community. Now, this is a happy end to our comic book story, right? The same scientists who run Google's PageRank and high-frequency trading are teaming up with the people who fight poverty and bring clean water to people. And they're doing amazing things, and we're going to continue to tell those stories. But there's a subtle point here, too, and I'm sure a lot of you have picked up on it, but I want to bring it to your attention just in case it's missed. And it's kind of the coolest part of all. And it's that I'm talking about all these guys as superheroes, but you're all superheroes. Right? I know that sounds cheesy, but you actually do have extraordinary powers that ordinary people don't. And you have more opportunities than ever to use those to help make the world a better place, just like these people did, just people who are just like you. So every comic book hero has an origin story, and I hope maybe for some of you this is the beginning of yours. And the world is changing, and we have that opportunity to change it for the better. So if we really are in the midst of the data revolution, let's make sure we're the good guys. Good guys, oh, like Tom Levine. Thank you very much.